Vision Music, Internet, and Digital Industries with a focus on production financing. He's familiar with state and federal tax incentives, entertainment and securities regulation, and advises on equity financing, pre-sales, international co-productions, and how to structure different deals. Nathan has been involved in DIY music and arts since his late teens. He helped start the DIY Aerospace Gallery and Performance Space in Olympia, Washington in 1997. Currently, he's a member of Silent Barn Collective, The Kitchen, and is liabilities manager or dark cloud chef who helps to manage and understand the various risks a legal DIY organization faces, and is part of the Silent Barn Working Group, Aesthetics, which functions as a kind of administration or operations group. So these are our panelists. I'm going to start with, the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to ask everyone a question about an area of expertise, and then I'm going to follow by opening it up to a Q&A with all of you. So the first question is, what does a DIY space need to consider when finding a space and negotiating a lease? What are some things they have to worry about? What are things that they should consider? And I'm going to ask Andrew to answer this.
All right. It depends a little bit on what your goals are starting out, whether you intend to be doing it for a long period of time, a shorter period of time. New York City is a monumentally complicated place in which to do business, and part of the reason so many DIY spaces have come into existence is because the bureaucratic load of doing something like that completely by the books is quite difficult, and a lot of places just don't bother with it. But if you want your place to be able to endure for the long term, you need to make sure that it can legally be used for the purpose that it's being used for, and the document relevant to that is called a certificate of occupancy. Or if the building was built before 1938, it's a letter of no objection from the Department of Buildings. And basically, just something that says that can be used for, it doesn't need to be spot on, but say a retail type use, or a use that would be commensurate with that, like needing a drinking establishment, something along those lines. And then you want to make sure that you're not just going to get priced out in no time. You want to make sure that you're getting a good price, that you're locked in for a certain number of years, and beyond that, the further things you try to do, you can have an option to purchase the place at a set price. But realistically, you just want to make sure that your rent's going to be affordable, and the place can be used for what you plan to use it for, and that it's in a place where you're not going to get shut down, when the neighbors are going to be cool, and you're not going to get sound complaints every other night.
As a follow-up to that, when you were purchasing your space, what did you have to consider?
Like Silent Barn, I wanted to have a live and artistic space, and that's really difficult. You generally have to have the spaces separated. The old Silent Barn, everything was jumbled together, and that was part of the reason that it got shut down. Now it's divided by floors with commercial on the ground floor and residential above, and that's tricky. There's a lot more mixed-use zoning in the city now, so there are plenty of properties that do fit that, but I was just trying to find any mixed-use building that I could afford that wasn't super far out into suburbia, and I was lucky to be able to find something in Williamsburg. But as the Silent Barn people know, it's quite a long, slow process of finding a good space, and if you find a good one that seems like it'll work your needs, you jump on it very quickly.
Thank you. And Michael, what should DIY venues or people creating a DIY space consider when it comes to business formation? What kind of business formation should they create? Should they go nonprofit, for-profit? What do you think?
Well, it depends. Basically, what I tell clients is the most important thing they could do is define what success means for them. Also have some sort of operating statement or mission statement. Once you have those things, and when you go to the lawyer, it'll be very easy for the lawyer to know exactly what is the best business form for the client. I've represented clients who've chosen DIY venues like Market Hotel. They've done a nonprofit, and the reason they did that is because they planned on doing a lot of educational things during the day with the community, and it just happened to fit with their overall plan. And the fact that nonprofit is tax exempt, that's obviously very attractive. So if you have part of your mission being to help the community, have educational things that people could latch on to, that's a very attractive option. For other spaces that want to have a lot of control over how to run their business, a nonprofit won't work, because part of the reason why a nonprofit is tax exempt is because it's very heavily regulated. There's only certain uses that you can do when you're a nonprofit. When you're running a business and you want more control and latitude over the way you run the business, every other business entity is a preferred option. If you want liability, most places go with an LLC. That seems to be the most popular choice. Silent Barn is an LLC. So those are the things to look out for. You want to look at control, what you could do with the business operation. You want to look at liability, how your personal assets could be protected if someone sues you, if you owe money to vendors, and you also want to look out for your tax liabilities. So those are the three things I would look at.
Can you also just explain the difference of what an LLC is as opposed to a regular corporation or a C corporation?
All right, well, an LLC it's a hybrid business structure that's relatively new. So the difference between an LLC and a corporation is an LLC, the control that you have with an LLC is much like a partnership or a sole proprietorship. You have a wide latitude to run the business the way you want. You don't have to report to shareholders like you do in a corporation. An LLC could be one person, it could be several members, and you could even elect to file your taxes as an individual with an LLC, or you can choose to be taxed as a corporation. Most LLCs don't do that, but the difference between an LLC and a corporation is essentially the control you have over the business. Corporation is more structured, you have to report to shareholders, and corporations are doubly taxed. So that's not a very attractive option for a lot of businesses. Most go with LLC for that reason.
And Donovan, do you have anything to add about which corporate form or for-profit or non-profit that an organization to decide?
Yeah, if you are, first of all, I just want to say thanks for having me here. It's really great to see this beautiful audience. If you are closely held or a small number of people running a business, and you don't have a lot of money, it makes sense to have an LLC because it's easier and cheaper to maintain than a corporation. It's more expensive to form, but it's cheaper to run, and you don't have to file quarterly federal and state taxes as you do with a corporation. And as Mike said, one of the most important aspects is the pass-through of taxation, so you're only taxed once instead of taxed on your income as well as on the income of the corporation.
Okay, thank you. And just one last question about corporations. Donovan and Michael, can you just discuss what considerations a DIY venue should think about when it's deciding to go either nonprofit or for-profit?
Well, it's your ultimate purpose. I like for-profit because I like to make money. Non-profits, and I can still do good as a for-profit, but I control my revenue stream. For a lot of companies, it may be harder to find startup capital as a for-profit. Whereas and vice versa, non-profits, you have grants, you have federal grants, state grants. A lot of organizations are set up to provide assistance to non-profits. And you may apply for tax exempt status. There's really no pro or con. It all, as Mike said, it all depends on what your overall corporate objectives are. Then you decide if it's going to be for-profit or non-profit.
Thank you.
I just want, the main thing is, if you have a purpose that you want to serve to the community, like a charitable purpose of some kind, a nonprofit is obviously what you're going to want to do. Another difference between a nonprofit and a LLC is the money thing. When you're an LLC, you can keep the profits, that the business makes. Let's say you're running a business and one year you make 1 million, another year you make 3 million. When you're a nonprofit, the officers and the directors and what have you, they have a salary. So no matter how much the business makes, they can only make a certain amount. When you're an LLC, you keep the profits. So as your business makes more and more money, you get more of a share of that money. The profits of a nonprofit, you have to reinvest towards the charitable purpose of your organization. So those are some of the things you have to weigh.
Yeah, Nathan, do you want to say something?
Hi, it's nice to be here. I'm really nervous. I just want to say something on the subject of LLCs and DIY. Some of you might be wondering, well, that doesn't seem very DIY, an LLC, and you might think it seems more like a private enterprise. And it does at first glance, but an LLC can define its mission as serving the collective will of another. For instance, that's what we do here. The LLC, its defined mission is to serve the will of our collective body called the kitchen. And in that way, we maintain not only DIY in a sense of a volunteer-based organization, but it's collectively run as well. So there are ways that you can use the LLC structure to resonate with what you might consider philosophically is the mission of a do-it-yourself institution.
Thank you. And Nathan, while I'm on you, can you discuss what DIY spaces have to consider when it comes to liabilities and insurance, and what you've learned as the Black Cloud Chef or the Dark Cloud Chef?
Yeah, it's crazy. I'll be quick, I guess. I'll start with the lease, because I was thinking as Andrew was talking about all our meetings about the lease when we were organizing here, and it's insane. Not only do you have to worry about whether or not you can pay how much the rent is a month, but there are conditions often hidden in a lease or just not brought to the surface that you need to understand. For instance, are you responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of the entire building? Or is your landlord? That's a liability you need to be aware of, because maybe you can afford the monthly rent, but maybe you can't afford it if the boilers blow up. Another thing is there are insurance terms in a lease. You need to be aware of those. Oftentimes there's an insurance clause, and you need to understand how much liability insurance you need to purchase, or else your landlord can kick you out at any time. So those are some things just in connection to a lease that you need to be really aware of. Jumping just into the category of insurance in general, much of what it means to legalize a DIY space has to do with insurance. Because insurance, different forms are interconnected in different ways. Meaning, for instance, if you don't have the liability insurance and coverage, which is both for building and for personal injury, your lease is not valid. See how they're interconnected? In the same way, if you don't have workers' comp and disability insurance, your bar, even if the state approved your paperwork, can be terminated at any time, your license. So you have to make sure you get these forms of insurance. It's kind of a grueling process. It's really important to find an insurance agent who you can be really honest with and say, hey, we're a DIY institution. We're not your typical organization. We have lots of questions, and who's willing to work with you on that. We were really lucky to find someone who was, and who wasn't turned off by us, who wasn't freaked out by us, and who was really helpful and stuck with us through primarily the problem of that a DIY institute or organization is volunteer driven. So like workers' comp is this thorny issue because workers' comp is supposed to be based on how much someone makes. Well, if no one's making anything, how do you develop a workers' comp figure? Now, we're not the first organization to go through this, and the state insurance fund is aware of these issues. Our insurance agent wasn't, but he worked with us to try to figure out solutions, and we figured out one. That's legal, and that if there ever is a problem, we can work it out with him and the state insurance fund. So it's a really tricky thing for those reasons. I can't tell you enough, I can't stress it enough, if you don't have this insurance, your long-term viability, which is what making a DIY space legal is all about. I mean, if you ask me, why are we here? Why are we even talking about this? Who cares about the system or whatever, or the status quo? Who cares about legalizing? but you want to if you want to be around for 10 years. And you can't be around for 10 years unless you have this insurance. So the policies you'll have to get again, I'll just say it quickly and then I'll be quiet, is you need to get your liabilities insurance, which covers your building and personal injury for your building, inside your building. Then also you need to get workers' comp. Now in an LLC situation, you can just cover the LLC members and work from there. Then you need to get disability insurance. One funny thing is disability insurance is more for women than men because they consider pregnancy a liability. The law is interesting. So you guys can unpack that one for yourselves. So you need to think about that. Anyways, you need to get all of that. And if you don't, there's even something called, what is it, for board members?
Directors and officers.
Yeah, if you really want to be careful, you can get directors' insurance as well. But anyways, those three things are the core forms of insurance you need. To give you kind of a rough figure without getting into our details, I think our insurance costs per month are around $500. And that's built into our budget, just to give you an idea.
Wow, of course.
While we're on the topic of liability, another important thing to keep in mind is you could be protected with an LLC, non-corporate, non-profit organization, but it's very important to have a business account, have an EIN, to keep your business matters really business and separate it from your personal affairs. Otherwise, the liability won't cover you.
Actually, Andrew, you want to discuss that? The pitfalls of not maintaining a corporate form and having an EIN and things like that.
I was just going to add that you get a certain amount of liability protection just by creating a corporate entity, whether it's a corporation, a nonprofit, or an LLC. And some people kind of operate on the theory that if they get sued, the LLC will go bankrupt and that'll be the end of it. And to a certain extent, that can be the case, and is often the case, but there's also this legal doctrine called piercing the corporate veil, where if you can show that people intermingled their finances with the corporation or took money out of the corporation that they shouldn't have, then they can be personally liable. So in theory, it grants you complete liability protection. In practice, people can still sue you in your individual capacity and try to make this case that you didn't keep them separate enough.
Thank you. And does anyone else have anything to add about liability before I want to move on to the next topic? Which is,
Concerning workers' comp, basically, if you don't have employees, you don't really need workers' comp. If you understand the difference between an employee and an independent contractor, you could, or hiring contract workers or temp who are already employees of some other company and they're just working for you on contract, you can avoid some of that liability.
okay. And actually, Donovan, I wanted to ask you, can you describe the different kinds of intellectual property protection that DIY spaces can apply for, and also when they should get to that point when they should consider protecting their intellectual property?
I will start with the last question. You should consider protecting your intellectual property the moment it's created. There are three main types of intellectual property, and there's a fourth one. You have patents, copyright, trademark, and trade secrets. What is the purpose of intellectual property? Intellectual property is to provide you compensation for your creation. Intellectual property is critical to foster innovation. So if other people are allowed to pirate your work and profit from it without sharing that with you, that would not encourage you to continue to be creative, would it?
That's sort of a philosophical idea that has everything to do with capitalism and everything to do with the idea that ideas are per se.
I agree. I agree with you, but what I said was incomplete. When I say protect your intellectual property, I don't mean you have to register it. There's really no requirement to register your copyright or your trademark. Your trademark exists through use, and trademark is any name or color or image that you use to distinguish your product or service. Copyright is any creation or authorship, and a patent is any invention. Now, when I say protect, I mean that you want to be able to monitor how your work is being used and by whom. So, of course, yeah, giving someone a license to use your patent is...
No, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but
Yes.
it's important. Creative Commons is not giving someone a license. It is a way of licensing your work for public use in a way that
Sorry, what is Creative Commons?
It is a licensing scheme.
But I'm not familiar with Creative Commons,
Okay,
and I'm not here to
okay.
speak about it.
But it is the other approach.
Right.
to
So let me give you my
intellectual
approach,
property.
and then in the Q&A, you can give me your questions. So my approach is this.
Perfect. No, it's part of the picture.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. I'm trying to understand you.
It's pretty new.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, wait, hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
What do you want to say? Just before we move on to
Yes.
The Creative Commons and the other side of the
let's discuss that during the Q&A.
So, when do you, how do you protect your invention, for example? You would apply for a patent, but there are ways in which you can protect your invention even before a patent is granted, because sometimes your invention may not be patentable. So, one, you can apply for a patent, and you're granted a patent, or you may not be granted a patent. If you're not granted a patent, you can still protect your work through contract, using a non-disclosure. So you plan to show your work to potential investors, for example, before you decide if you're going to make multiple copies of your handbag that you've designed. Before you submit it, you could apply for a provisional patent, which is much cheaper and lasts for a year, and that would give you protection as a regular patent, or you could have the individual sign an agreement stating that they will not disclose this information to anybody else, and if they do, then they would pay a license fee or some other kind of compensation. One major issue with my clients with regard to trademark. The first thing, your trademark is like your brand. It's your name. It's what people see and recognize and know about your product or service. So your trademark distinguishes your product or service from anybody else's. And it's extremely critical when you are starting a company to think about the name for your business. Or even if it's a product, to think about the name that you're going to call that product. And you would do a search to make sure that nobody else is using that name to describe a similar product or service, because you want to avoid any likelihood of confusion. And if you're using somebody else's name to market your product, and it's a similar product or service, you are infringing on their trademark, and they could sue you for damages.
Okay.
Can I
Thank
just
you. Yeah,
30
Nathan,
seconds
go
on
ahead.
that? I know that in the DIY community, there's a long history of philosophical debate on the issue of trademark and copyright and what is property, and I respect everyone's different points of view on that. Practically speaking, as someone who's engaged in trying to legalize a DIY organization, one question you might consider is, do I want to find myself 5 years from now finding out that someone across town has opened up another space with the same name? And not only finding out they have, but that they have trademarked it. And then your only recourse then is to take them to court if you want to. It's not your only recourse. Your other one is then to have to dismantle your 5 years of cultural heritage and rename yourself. And a name can be, it's not just arbitrary. It can mean a lot, symbolically, to you and people who participate in your community, who are your community. So disputes about the philosophy of trademark aside, one place that I've considered it, or one point of view I've considered it from, is that of the name, and a name for your service. And I see people from the Living Gallery here. You might ask yourself, do I want to protect this name? And not trademarking on an object for sale, but as a service, meaning trademarking your gallery as a living gallery. And again, I know that we can do the Q&A at the end about this. There's a lot to talk about. I know there are a lot of philosophical differences on this. I understand. It's a really important question you need to ask yourself. And I think everyone will have a different response to it in their own DIY communities and organizations.
Thank you. And the final question I have for Andrew is, what kind of licensing do you have to deal with as a DIY space? Thinking about public assembly or liquor license or food handling or things like that.
It's about the most complicated and the most important part. If you want to try to open a completely licensed or basically licensed space, to be honest, there are degrees of legality. I doubt there is any business in existence that is perfectly complied with every minuscule aspect of every law in existence. I've been in the Department of Buildings building, and I bet that building has hundreds of building code violations. So I've talked to law clerks and lawyers that didn't have even judges who have almost no understanding of the law or the basic rules of evidence. We've created this edifice. It's so monumentally complex that honestly no one can memorize it all at once. It's just thousands and thousands of pages of stuff to go through. And to a certain extent, you pick your battles. But the first and foremost of all of these things is a liquor license. If you don't have a liquor license, there's a very good chance you're going to get shut down. And if the cops come out, the first thing they're going to see is a liquor license. Within that, you've got events permits, which you can get for just one night for like $38. It's a really simple thing to do. We can only do it a few times a year. And then you've got either like a tavern wine license or a full on-premises license. The full on-premises license is very hard to get. For both, you have to go through the community board and then the state liquor authority. And the community board, you might breeze through if you get along well with the people there, or they might run you out of town. It all depends on, in large part, what community board you're in. Williamsburg and Bushwick have pretty friendly community boards. At East Village, it's nearly impossible to get anything approved. But it's actually surprisingly cheap to get a beer and wine license. It's $5.75 a year, which that's less than $2 a day. If you're having a lot of events, that's actually really affordable. Full liquor is $5,000. I got a tavern wine license for mine, and I found it to be perfectly adequate. If I want to sell anything liquor-like, I sell soju, which is kind of like sake, a little bit stronger, and that seems to be a good enough substitute. We kind of went over certificate of occupancy. You want to find a place that already has that. That's a nightmare. Like, dealing with Department of Buildings has been 10 times worse than everything else put together. I did a whole addition onto my building, and it made me wish I was dead for 2 years. I would sooner jump off a cliff than deal with Department of Buildings on anything again. They're just a dysfunctional organization, and you might as well bash your head against the wall for 10 years. Although, if you knew a little more than I did going in and had an architect that self-certified his work, that can make things quite a bit easier. An architect that will self-cert, which is about half of them, can basically just, like that, approve the building plans. So about 30% of those will be audited, which could be problematic. They can come back and say you have to change things after the fact. But if you're doing something relatively small, just some interior changes to partition walls and stuff like that, you're trying to get a new use legalized, that may be a pretty rational way to go. Find an architect who will self-cert, some won't for liability reasons, and do it that way. But you're better off finding a place that's legal for its use. And honestly, there are a lot of venues out there, some of which even have liquor licenses, that run completely contrary to their C of O, that might say that they're only able to have a tiny number of people in and they have much more. For instance, the public place of assembly permit, that's one you could probably, unless it's a really big space, you probably don't need. You can have 74 people without a place of assembly permit. If you're not regularly going over 74, it's probably not worth all the hassle. Food establishment permit. The Department of Health considers beer food. It seems to be counterintuitive, but technically, if you're serving beer and wine, you're supposed to have a food establishment permit, and that's where you get the letter grade ABC. It's not that big a deal. They're going to inspect. You may well get fined a little bit, even if you get A's. You know, if you get A on the first go, they don't charge you anything, but you could easily rack up $1,000 or $2,000 worth of fines over the course of a couple of years while you're learning what you're doing. Even if you're pretty careful. But it's easier if there's no kitchen or anything like that. Like it's way more complicated. And then finally, sales tax, I'd say, is the last really complicated issue. If you're an LLC or a for-profit business, you need to get something called a certificate of authority to collect sales tax. And that's really simple. It takes like 5 minutes, and then you just have to keep track of and keep separate your sales tax receipts and disperse them to the government. There's a state website, you do it all through, it's not that bad. If you're a nonprofit, there's something called a sales tax exemption. I guess there's a certificate to show that you're exempt from sales tax, and then you don't have to account for it. But the risk if you operate without all that is you could operate for years without there being a problem, and then one day the state Department of Finance comes in and say, hey, by the way, you sold $200,000 worth of beer over the last 5 years, you owe us 9% of that, and then you're kind of up creek. So in order of importance, I'd say you absolutely need to have a liquor license if you want to be around for a long time. And generally you want your certificate of occupancy to comply with use, at least generally, maybe a retail use, food establishment use would be sufficient. And you probably want to get a food establishment permit if you're going to be around for long term and figure out something with respect to sales tax. But at some point you do pick your battles, like I decided not to mess with an assembly permit and just keep my shows down to 74 people. If you, some of these things, applying for trademarks and copyrights, like it would be a slow process, and you just have to decide which battles you're ready to fight. But those are the main ones. I recommend people check out this website, NYC Business Express, that you can enter in the data for the kind of business you're trying to create. And it will give you a list of every single license you might need and links to the relevant websites to get data, because there's a lot of them and it's really complicated here. NYC Business Express. That was my starting point when I had no idea what I was doing, and the fact that there's so much good information online through that website that gets linked to, it's just a good way to start out, and then if you just follow everything from there, you can learn about what you need and what you don't.
Nathan?
Just quickly on the subject of a beer and wine license, if you're looking to create a long-term DIY organization, one big question is money, and the cash cow is the bar. You're really going to have to organize yourselves in a way to see to it that you do what Andrew's talking about. You get yourself a legal beer and wine license and the insurance that goes with it to maintain its legality. Otherwise, it's really hard to probably meet the financial needs you're going to have to over the long term. It'll be difficult. The authorities, if they ever come, and by authorities I mean police officers, to your venue, for whatever reason, one thing they will first ask if they see any alcohol is to see your beer and wine paperwork. It needs to be up where it needs to be. Whoever is volunteering needs to speak with an authoritative tone about it, and you need to show that you know what you're doing. Even if the paperwork's right in front of them, sometimes they will challenge you about it. There's an antagonistic, for some reason, relationship in the community between authority and a lot of DIY organizations and art organizations. So you have to really make sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and that whoever is there understands perfectly where everything is. The space that I helped to start in Olympia, the reason it was finally shut down is because it did not have a legal bar. In many spaces, that's the reason why they get shut down. Oftentimes they would get something called a banquet license, which is easy in Washington, and then after I left, people started mismanaging the space and people started drinking. And we all know DIY spaces where that happens. The point is, it wanted to be a long-term space, and you can't be a long-term space and maintain that type of structure. It's just not going to work. Sooner or later, especially if you're all ages, some kid's going to be there with beer and go home, and mom or dad's going to find out about it, and your place is going to shut down. So for monetary reasons, as well as just to stay open, you need to get that legal beer and wine license and like treat it like it's your god. You just need to like really love it. And you need to give it a little kiss in the morning, tuck it in at night, and just make sure it knows you love it very much.
Thank you. And one last question for all the panelists is, when do you think you actually, what do you think you can do yourself, and when do you think you actually need to get a lawyer? What's the big issue, or where do you think that becomes a turning point? Let's start.
It's incredibly daunting. I don't know if I would have been able to make it through all of it had I not been a lawyer. Originally, I was going to open a bar in New Orleans out of college, and once I started researching all the issues involved, I got overwhelmed and went to law school, figuring if I really wanted to do so after, then I could. Fortunately, I still stuck with it even after all that extra time, but it's intimidating. Fortunately, in New York, a lot of that information is online. That was not true in New Orleans. You had to call up a million different clerks, and most of them really didn't know anything about anything, so it made a much more slow and tedious process of discovering that information. So if you have the fortitude and inclination to read through thousands of pages of nitty-gritty regulations, you can. And honestly, if you're doing it on a budget, you may have to. I didn't use a lawyer for anything, because I was, but of course I was doing areas I had no background in, so I was mostly teaching myself as I went along. It wouldn't have been a totally different experience had I not been a lawyer. When you're applying for a beer and wine license, having a lawyer allows the lawyer to self-certify, and that can speed up the process quite a bit and make things a bit easier. But even that wasn't a monumentally complex process. It's mostly a matter of saving time. So if you have the time and you're not in a rush, you could do a traditional process. So it's trade-offs between time and money. If you have the money, having a lawyer will make things a lot easier. If you don't have it and you really want to do it yourself, you can, but it's going to be difficult. And you're going to have to put a ton of time into reading everything that's out there to really understand it. But ultimately, there are directions out there, and if you're willing to read the 45-page instructions, 20-page form, you'll figure it out.
I think you should consult a lawyer when you have a crystal clear idea of what kind of space you want to run, what kind of business you want to have. You should at least consult an attorney at that point. As far as from there, I think a lot of the stuff out there you could fill out on your own. All these forms we've talked about, all these registrations and filings, you could actually go online, get the form, and what I would suggest is fill out what you can, fill out the forms as much as you can, and then take it to a lawyer to have him finish it or review what you've already done. I think doing it that way could actually save you a lot of money, but I think as soon as you have a clear idea of what you want to do, you should at least consult a lawyer at that point.
Yeah, I think you should consult a lawyer the moment you have an idea. Well, we are all here, we're entrepreneurs. Each one of you is an entrepreneur, I think. That's what the DIY space is all about. And so, to some extent, you plan or are engaged in a business. Now, common sense will tell you that if you have no idea how to run a business, then maybe you shouldn't be running one, or you should make sure you surround yourself with those who can help you run a business. And so, having the right knowledge, so either you do your own research, if you don't know how to create a business plan, you can learn to do one. They have free business plan courses at several libraries around Brooklyn, online courses. And I said consult a lawyer, the first idea. It's not necessarily practical because attorneys are expensive, but the point I'm trying to make is get the right people in your corner. Get people smarter and brighter than you who can guide you and help you to accomplish your goals.
You got applause, it sounded like out there. Practically speaking, some areas where a legal help or a lawyer can be of benefit is when you are looking over your lease. The language of a lease can be impossible to get through. I read Derrida for 4 years, and I thought that was annoying. And the law is much more confusing than French philosophy. So it's good to have a lawyer there to look through it, especially to catch little details and clauses that you won't maybe catch on your own. For instance, in a different building, in a different situation, a friend of mine was starting a store, and it didn't really matter, but the lawyer caught that secretly kind of in the language there, the space is prohibited from serving any type of food. The landlord didn't bring that up to my friend. It was there though. Now it doesn't impact the type of business, but it might for you. So that was something the lawyer found. So that's where a lawyer can be incredibly helpful. A place you will have to get a lawyer is when it comes to your beer and wine license. You will have to get, as they say, the classic liquor lawyer. You need a lawyer for that, hands down. Just budget that, figure it out. Don't try to philosophically wiggle out of it. You're gonna need a liquor lawyer, especially because there might be hang-ups after you think you're okay. And that's all, it can happen, and you need to reach out to someone who can work with the state liquor board to try to solve those problems. It's helpful to have a lawyer look over whatever business arrangement you have. If it's an LLC, it could be your LLC agreement between the members, something, just any type of business relationship. If you can't, you can maybe live without that, it's helpful. If you are a multi-use space like this, it's helpful to have lawyers look over lease contracts you have with your tenants, studio tenants or residential tenants, ultimately to protect you. Not to help you exploit anyone or anything crazy like that, but to protect you and to protect them. Another thing is, I know you're thinking lawyer and you're thinking all this money and everything. You gotta remember we're all here because we're DIY, so we're all into the volunteer thing. It's gonna blow your mind. If you start an organization, there are lots of lawyers out there who are gonna be willing to volunteer their time. People whose interests resonate with whatever it is your organization is doing. The thing is, you gotta put in the time to look for them. We're really lucky that we've met some amazing lawyers who have decided to help us out. And it's not even like they've become us. They're the silent barn as well. Your organization, you can find those people too. It's hard to work with a pro bono lawyer because after a while, their firm might not want the relationship to go on. That can be tough. So you're gonna have to develop in your budget some means to provide for a paid lawyer in the case of emergency. And that's an important long-term goal. To say in our budget, we need to have $5,000 squared away right here in the case that Department of Abilities comes in and shuts down everything and says you can't reopen, whatever it is. A crisis budget, some kind of little pocket where you can keep that money. Because if you're, again, in this for the long term, you might need a lawyer sometime. So that's good too, from a financial perspective.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for speaking. If you have questions for any of our participants, not yet, but I'm waiting. Finish my sentence. About some topic that they discussed that doesn't get to be discussed now, I'm going to put their information on the Facebook event page, so you can reach out to them. But let's open up the floor to questions. You over here with the blonde hair. He's right here. Yeah.
Well, I have like a million questions, but that's where we're ready to go.
Start with one.
Okay, cool. My first question that was ignited in the very beginning of everything was less practical and kind of more philosophical in the sense of how everyone defines what a DIY space is, because that's something we are all talking about, but I feel like everyone has a different opinion as to what that is. So I was just wondering if anyone is open to everyone on the panel to say what they believe that is. What a DIY space is.
In the strictest definition, you could argue it's only the unlicensed spaces. Back in the day, that was the perception, but as more and more of those places got shut down, it became clear that any place like that has a very limited lifespan, and it's fun while it lasts, but there's something to be said for creating something enduring that'll be around in 20 years. And I think that's why everybody's here. When I opened my place was right about the time that the original Silent Barn got shut down, Market Hotel got shut down. Monster Island and Secret Project Robot got shut down, and it really seemed like the scene was under assault to the extent where it was never going to be the same again. So I very deliberately went out to trying to create a home for that same sort of stuff without being legally susceptible, taking advantage of the fact I was a lawyer, was also interested in the scene that I could kind of act as a connecting point between all the boring lawyers and business people and the people that were cooler than me that could make it have a heartbeat. So for me, maybe the key thing is being a host for more creative or obscure or avant-garde arts that are out there. There are a million venues that just have like poppy rock bands all the time, and it's really, really boring. And what I liked about the Silent Barn was going and seeing things like a 10-hour noise festival, or just stuff that, or even in my own place, having like a night of Irish cheese and karaoke, or having a debate over the future of Bitcoin, or having just something that you wouldn't normally see when you walk into a commercial establishment, kind of reaching into the outer depths of obscure forms of performance and entertainment, and creating a home for things to thrive that normally can't afford to find a place because it's just so expensive to do things legally. You know, rents are so high in New York, the bureaucracy is so high. It's really hard to get a legal space in which to operate. And if you can do that and then use that space for something really worthwhile, create something beautiful and not just be like a boring kind of poppy money machine, I think that's a really worthwhile service to contribute.
Okay. Before I answer the question, I just want to point out I have outlines of the different business forms that anyone can grab after the. But as far as the DIY question, I think we're moving into a new phase of what DIY means. I think 5 years ago it was commonly thought of as unlicensed venue. Now I feel like there's a lot of places that are looking to take the next step and get their ducks in a row, become legal. That's what Silent Barn did, that's what Market Hotel is doing. And I think now DIY is more about community. It's about a group of people who want to nurture talent, nurture arts in general, and they want to put on shows that you wouldn't see in venues in Manhattan, more experimental stuff. And I think that's hopefully in the future, the next wave will be places that figure out a way to become legal and stick around for a while.
Yes, you were there.
Just going back to the different corporate forms, I want to know if any of you had experience with like the benefit corporation, the B Corp, or anything like that. This is a new one that I was interested in.
I'm glad you asked that question because I went to a workshop like 2 weeks ago and I was thinking as I was in that workshop, why am I here? And now I know why I was there. Because you're asking me here about why I was there. So benefit corporations are new and are legal in New York State.
Right.
But it's really a question about growth. That's a question about money, really. And a benefit corp is really great if you've gone the private route instead of being, say, a nonprofit, and you're an LLC and you're looking for more money and investment, but you don't want to stray from your social values. The law, the way it's written now, is you can be sued if you say, we're going to pay more for this thing, item X that we need because it's produced locally, rather than overseas cheaper. Well, someone who's a member, who's a stockholder, someone who's invested in you can actually file a lawsuit saying that you're not privileging profit, and you can find yourself in big trouble. A benefit corp protects you from that because you can write into your core values that you aim as a corporation to only buy local. And so your investors are aware of that, and that is privileged just as much as the profit is. Now, who is that who benefits from a benefit corp? That's really when you want to get much, much bigger. Like for instance, Patagonia is a famous benefit corp. There's some strangeness to it in the fact that it's the free market regulating itself, meaning you get approved to be a benefit corp by benefit corp approving companies. Yes, you do, Paula.
No, two separate things. They've done a really good job
Mystifying
of
it.
capturing the field.
Yes.
So Rainforest Alliance is a third party certifier that would totally.
That's
qualify.
well, all right. That's what I'm referring to. Is you have to get certified in these. And anyways, so
B Corp Inc., which is a
is one of
nonprofit,
those.
is
Yes.
one of those.
Yeah. So we're on the same page. So anyways, it's really a question of just like again, as you if you are an LLC and you want to become a corporation, if you want to make sure that your social values are respected as much as profit and everything. Some arts organizations will probably be moving that way in the future. But it's really, as for a small DIY space, it's probably not a question you're going to need to face at this point, I'd say.
Question, actually you said it before, yeah.
My question was about donations in terms of liquor. Is it different? Do you need a liquor license if you're operating strictly on a donation basis?
Yes.
Strictly speaking, yes.
And
so-
BYOB, you need a liquor license.
Yes, so we're familiar with Delinquency, which tried to open up as a sort of licensed DIY space, but they jumped ahead a step or two, and they had donation-based shows. So it was actually a very good deal. We paid a small cover to get in, like $10, and it was all you could drink, and it was a beautiful space, and they'd done a really good job of putting it together. And they were shut down in no time because the cops basically took the position, well, this is just a roundabout way of selling liquor without a license. And I talked about shades of legality and the things you absolutely have to have and the things you don't. The liquor license is pretty much at the top. So you can have a donation-based show, but that's basically just being a completely unlicensed DIY space.
My question, I guess, goes in conjunction and then a follow-up. So have any of you, seen a nonprofit with a liquor license before?
Well, none that exist right now, but I know one or two that are planning to have that kind of model, but I haven't actually seen it in operation yet.
And so it's solely just because of the complication involved in?
There is a rule that with a nonprofit that the what you earn as a nonprofit has to come primarily from your tax exempt purpose. How that would work, I'm not exactly sure. So I think it's kind of a gray area, and I haven't seen it in actuality play out.
Maybe we can talk later.
Yeah.
And then I was just wondering, Nathan, you kind of added when you were talking about intellectual property, the importance of a trademark, and that you were kind of just using the example that, it'd be good to have a trademark for your services. Is that beyond just being a corporation and having your name already incorporated so that, like what I know, the businesses that I've worked with, they've incorporated and thus their name has been taken off the market because they've used that name, and you can't incorporate with that name because it's used. So is trademark different?
It's a great question because there's an assumption in your question that I shared. Incorporating under a name does not protect anyone else from trademarking that name. They're mutually exclusive. For instance, let's say you have a DIY space that's illegal called Awesome Hot Dogs.
Awesome.
And then you are becoming legal and you want to incorporate in New York State as Awesome Hot Dogs. Well, I can file a federal trademark for Awesome Hot Dogs operating in New York State, and you can't do anything about it except take me to court to argue that you've been operating longer as that, and then it gets sent to a court. In other words, filing in a state, incorporating in a state under a certain name is not filing for a trademark. And people often are confused about that, I've found. I was, and when I talked to some folks who were helping me out with this, they said that's a common misconception.
I think I should answer that question because my main practice is this area. I represent entertainers, and basically all an entertainer has is his copyright and his trademark. A trademark is a noun, and a trademark is created the moment you begin to use something, a name, an image, a logo, a color to represent your product. That's a trademark. What you're asking about is registration of your trademark, and there is no legal requirement, none whatsoever, to register your trademark. But registering your trademark has benefits. One benefit is that it puts the world on notice that this person or this organization uses this logo or this name to represent their product or service. The name of your company is your trademark. And so you may register that with the USPTO separately from forming your company and filing your articles or certificate of incorporation. However, I must stress, the moment you begin to use your name to sell beers or the Silent Barn, the first to use within that geographical location is the one who owns the trademark. And the reason you register your trademark in a central database is so that someone in California or someone in Germany who wants to do business in New York, if they have this common sense, will check to see if there's any other DIY space with that name. Because if they move in and start using the Silent Barn, then they will be infringing on your trademark because you've been using it before.
Thank you. Andrew has one thing he wants to say, and then I think we have time for like one very, 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 very quick question.
Just to add, in addition to trademark, there's something called a certificate of assumed name. Technically, every LLC has LLC in its name, and every corporation has corp or inc in its name. But you also have a doing business as name, and that's a very quick one-page form you file with the New York State Secretary of State saying, here's $25. Muchmore's Cafe LLC is doing business under the name Muchmore's. Prosthetics LLC is doing business under the name Silent Barn, whatever it might be. Like you have your LLC name, and then you have the name you actually do business under, and that filing by itself would be some proof that you've been using the name since the date you filed those papers.
That's not the same as reserving a name?
It is not registering a trademark with the federal government, but it would be evidence you could use down the road if someone tried to steal your name, is that you've been using the name previously, but then you have to go to court.
Tax ID number and
Yeah.
name, 'cause
When-
when you get it, usually when you get your tax ID number, you can only get your tax ID number if there's no other place with the same name as
Yeah.
your business.
When you file for your, if you go to register your name as as an official trademark, it will ask you on the form when it was the first used, and then and the second question, with respect to this, it'll ask you when it was first used in commerce. And at the time when you do the form, you don't have to upload any documentation to support this, but this is all to establish what we're talking about, like this, that there's a heritage of use of the mark and everything. And these are all forms that, like, for instance, you might bring to court if there ever was a hearing over it or something. It's cool. The issue of trademark, again, is debated a lot. But a lot of DIY, and a lot of you who might be here have been operating probably illegally. And so the question of trademarking, or of registering your trademark, to be really specific, that you've been using already, is really important because you're protecting also your heritage. Maybe for 6 years you've been operating illegally under a certain name. Well, it's good if once you start to legalize to protect that, because by protecting that name, you're protecting those 6 years that you existed, where you're in a real weird legal area. Like, let's say you go to a trademark dispute in a court over the use of the name, but as evidence, you have to offer 6 years of a legal business operation. Now, I don't know how that would I don't know what would happen in that courtroom. I know I don't want to be in that courtroom. That's going to be a weird room. Your Honor, we've been using the name for 6 years. We should get it, although what we've been doing was bad and illegal. I don't know what he's going to do, spank you and say it's okay? I don't know. So anyways, it's good to protect the name as soon as you can, even if you might have reservations about copyright and trademark philosophically.
Okay, we're actually out of time. I'm sorry. We have time for Okay, we have time for one more question. You over there with the yellow shirt.
Yeah, I think that maybe getting back to maybe people that are looking for their spaces and stuff like that, I think you two guys have some very personal experiences that probably, can elucidate on and help people out in the sense of, like, what exactly were your experiences from bridging the gap between C of O and liquor, and at what point did your C of O match or liquor, that SLA approved your application given the C of O change, or if it's something that was existing or something like that? Because everybody seems to have different experiences with that. I know people that have gotten their liquor license prior to a CFO approval and so forth after that, you know. But like usually that's like a gray area, you know. What are your experiences with that?
My situation was a bit unusual because I was actually building an addition onto the building. It was a 100-year-old building, but with a brand new addition, so I had to go through a super elaborate filing with the Department of Buildings and a year of building plan approvals process, and then a building plan amendment to get the venue space legalized. And then after all the construction was done, they revoked my building plans, and I had to get it reapproved because they wanted me to add in fire sprinklers in the whole building for $30,000. And I'd already spent that money to build a fire escape, which they told me to do instead of sprinklers the first time around. So yeah, it's a nightmare. You don't want to deal with those guys any more than you have to, but generally when you are applying for your tavern wine license, they're going to want to see proof of legal occupancy. That could be a C of O, or it could be a letter of no objection. For my own building, I had a letter of no objection. It was a bit ambiguous. It said it could be used as a two-family residence. The original use of the building was a two-family residence plus a store on the bottom. DOB had maintained, there was actually also a ground floor residence, a third residence when I bought it. Turned out the prior owner had illegally converted that from commercial to residential space. The DOB's position was the legal use of the ground floor was a commercial space. They had the letter of no objection that was sufficient to get it considered to be grandfathered in of the prior use. It had been like there had been a candy store, there had been some other commercial use, and you know, the zoning has to be correct to get a C of O, and you can look at zoning maps online.
So in that particular instance, pre-1930 old code, which they consider old code.
When it goes from commercial to commercial, and you don't have to actually have like eating and drinking establishment.
Buildings.
No.
Which is like, for instance, Roberta's. Everybody's familiar with Roberta's. Roberta's old code in 19 whatever for a gas station.
Buildings.
They have a C of O for a gas station, but they still have a liquor license.
I have heard of a number of places getting licenses, even though their C of O didn't talk about being an eating or drinking establishment. If the building is from before 1938, it's generally only going to have a letter of no objection, which is a vaguer document. And I don't know how Roberta's did it. I don't know how some of the other spaces did it. I was using a letter of no objection in my own case. But I have heard of instances of people getting beer and wine licenses, even if the C of O didn't entirely match up. And I'm not quite entirely sure how they did it.
One other area to be really careful about that we've had some strange personal experiences in is who is drinking out in the yard right now? Anyone? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, when we filed for our beer and wine license, the yard was included in the paperwork and was approved by the state. As far as C of O is concerned, this is a mixed-use building. The issue wasn't with any of that. It was that the address on the yard is different than the address for this building. And when one time when the authorities were here, they asked to, or they said, they looked at this and they said, well, you people can't be outside drinking. And mind you, we thought we were operating legally. We were operating innocently, like thinking this was great, everything's super. And they said, no, the beer and wine license doesn't apply out here. Everyone who's drinking outside is drinking illegally. And it had to do with addresses. So if you are looking to get a beer and wine license, and if you want it to cover any area outside of your immediate building, there's all sorts of already other issues with all that. Make sure the address is the same. That's one thing I can just double check, because otherwise it's crazy. Or when you file the paperwork, you have to have the additional address included somehow in the paperwork. I don't understand exactly how, but that's what's caught us and tripped us up. And that's some personal experience I can share. Now, again, you asked, when should we have a lawyer? This is something a lawyer is helping us with. And this is something that probably would be hard for us to solve on our own, if we could even at all.
Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to the speakers for speaking. And now there's going to be Milk, Dick, Hippie, and My Teenage Stride playing after this. And also, I think probably the lawyers are going to be around, so I'm sure if you have questions, they'd be happy to answer them.
Milk Dick.
Yeah, that was great. So, it's Nathan.
Yeah.
Stephanie, nice to meet you. It's great that you've been helping and working with them. I'd love to pick your brains. I don't know how much you want to. Ridiculous questions. My actually part-time business with